With one brutal thrust of a spear, he became the most infamous soldier in history. Yet his name was nearly erased from it. The man who pierced Jesus' side wasn't more than just a witness to the crucifixion. His act set off a chain reaction that would topple empires, inspire secret societies, and turn him from executioner to saint. But was this Roman soldier a simple pawn, or was he destined to change the course of humanity forever? The truth behind Saint Longinus is darker, stranger, and more shocking than you could ever imagine. Who was he, and what secrets did his spear unleash? We begin with the chaos at Golgotha. The air is thick with tension, the cries of onlookers echoing as the sky darkens. Among the soldiers enforcing the crucifixion stands one man, performing what seemed like an ordinary duty of a Roman centurion. But this moment was anything but ordinary, and neither was the man. This was Gaius Cassius Longinus, or so the legend goes. But who was he really? Was he even real? Or is his name just a convenient placeholder in a story crafted centuries later? Let's start with what the Gospels tell us. The Gospel of John describes a soldier piercing Christ's side to ensure he was dead. The unnamed centurion's actions were procedural, standard for Roman executions. No name, no identity. Just a faceless enforcer of the empire. So where does Longinus come in? The story of Longinus as the centurion doesn't appear in canonical texts. Instead, his name emerges from apocryphal sources centuries later. The Acts of Pilate, a document tied to the Gospel of Nicodemus, is one of the first to identify this soldier as Longinus. But here's the twist. The document was written long after the crucifixion, raising questions about whether this was history or early Christian mythology. Why was this particular soldier singled out? Now let's get into the juicy details that textbooks rarely explore. Early Christian traditions paint Longinus as a man who wasn't just doing his job, but experiencing something transformative. According to legend, Longinus was nearly blind, a soldier who had seen countless battles but could no longer see clearly. When he pierced Jesus' side, a drop of blood and water supposedly fell into his face, and in that moment, his vision was miraculously restored. Imagine standing there 1 second enforcing Roman law, the next witnessing what felt like a divine act. Did this spark a change in him? Could this be why his name became immortalized in Christian lore? But Longinus' story gets even stranger. Apocryphal texts claim he wasn't just healed physically, but spiritually awakened. This was a man who saw something far more profound: truth, divinity, salvation. The church eventually declared him a saint, and his name became synonymous with redemption. Still, there's little evidence to confirm he was a real person. The Roman military kept detailed records, but Longinus doesn't appear in any official documents from the time. Some scholars suggest his name, derived from the Greek word longe, meaning spear, could simply be a symbolic reference to the act of piercing Christ. Let's step away from the theology for a moment and dive into the historical backdrop. By the 1st century, Roman soldiers were not just warriors. They were instruments of political control. Centurions were career military officers, often chosen for their discipline and loyalty. They were the backbone of the Roman army, trusted to carry out orders without question. For a centurion to have such a radical shift, from executioner to saint, was not just rare but borderline unbelievable. Could Longinus' transformation be an allegory? A way for early Christians to show that even Rome's most devout servants could be redeemed? The story doesn't end with his moment at the cross. According to Eastern Orthodox traditions, Longinus later left the Roman military and became a Christian missionary. He traveled to Cappadocia, spreading the gospel and converting others. But his newfound faith made him a target of the empire. Under orders from Pontius Pilate, Roman soldiers hunted him down, and he was executed for his defiance. Some accounts claim his head was sent back to Pilate as proof of his death. This wasn't just a man who witnessed history. He became a martyr for it. But here's the kicker. Longinus' story varies wildly depending on the source. In some versions, he dies a humble death. In others, he's a fearless rebel who confronts his executioners with unwavering faith. Even the relics associated with Longinus spark controversy. The spear, known as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny, has been the subject of countless legends. Several churches claim to possess it, each relic surrounded by its own web of myths and conspiracies. Did Longinus himself hold the spear that pierced Jesus? Or was it just a prop later imbued with sacred significance? The relic has been tied to everything from the rise of empires to the fall of leaders. Napoleon, Hitler, and Charlemagne are just a few names linked to its supposed power. But here's the question no one seems to ask. If the spear is real, why is its history so fragmented and its authenticity so disputed? Longinus' story is as much about faith as it is about mystery. How did an unnamed soldier in the Bible evolve into a saint with a name, a backstory, and relics tied to his legacy? Was this divine intervention, or did early Christians craft his story to symbolize something greater? What else might we uncover about the man who changed history with a single thrust of his spear? And if Longinus' transformation is true, what does that say about the power of belief and redemption? Blinded by blood, then healed by faith. Imagine being a soldier, standing at the foot of a crucifixion. The earth quakes, the sky darkens, and the man on the cross before you, labeled a criminal, is said to be the Son of God. Now picture this. You carry out your grim duty, and in doing so, something inexplicable happens to you. This is where the legend of Longinus takes a dramatic turn, with an event that has captivated believers and skeptics alike for centuries. Let's uncover the story of the soldier whose life changed the moment blood and water touched his face. According to early Christian writings, Longinus was suffering from poor eyesight at the time of the crucifixion, possibly even partial blindness. This was unusual for a Roman centurion, a role that required precision and sharp observation. But it's said that he had managed to climb the ranks of the Roman army despite this condition. His near blindness added a layer of vulnerability to the hardened image of a soldier, making his story all the more compelling. The defining moment came when Longinus pierced Christ's side with a spear. The Gospels describe how blood and water poured from the wound, but apocryphal accounts go further, claiming that some of this mixture splattered onto Longinus' face. What happened next would shape his legacy forever. Longinus' vision, which had been failing him for years, was miraculously restored. Imagine being in his position. One moment, your world is a haze. The next, it is crystal clear, not just physically, but spiritually. Was this a coincidence? A medical phenomenon? Or was it divine intervention? To understand the significance of this event, we have to look at the symbolism of blood and water in Christian theology. Blood often represents sacrifice and atonement, while water is a symbol of purity and baptism. For Longinus, being touched by both was seen as a sign of divine cleansing. Early Christians believed this act wasn't accidental. It was as if Christ's death had chosen Longinus, marking him for a greater purpose. But this miraculous healing didn't just give Longinus his sight back. It gave him a new purpose. The soldier who had once been an agent of Roman power now saw the world through a completely different lens, one of faith. Early Christian texts suggest that Longinus was overwhelmed by what he had witnessed. The earthquake, the darkened sky, the piercing cry of Jesus as he died. All of it pointed to something far greater than the political unrest the Romans had feared. This was the turning point of history, and Longinus had been at the center of it. The transformation of Longinus from a soldier to a believer didn't happen in isolation. After the crucifixion, he is said to have left the Roman army, renounced his former life, and sought out the disciples of Christ. The courage it must have taken to walk away from everything he had known is truly inspiring, isn't it? The Roman military was a way of life, a symbol of loyalty to the empire. Abandoning it was considered treason. Yet Longinus chose faith over fear, setting the stage for his eventual sainthood. But not everyone saw his transformation as a miracle. Roman authorities viewed his actions with suspicion. To them, Longinus' newfound faith wasn't just a personal choice, it was a threat. By leaving the army and spreading the message of Christianity, Longinus was undermining the very foundation of Roman authority. The empire relied on soldiers like him to enforce its laws, maintain order, and suppress dissent. A centurion turned Christian wasn't just a defector, he was a walking symbol of rebellion. Interestingly, Longinus' story also intersects with the early Christian debates about miracles and faith. His healing was often cited as evidence of Christ's divinity. After all, if even a hardened Roman soldier could experience such a profound transformation, what greater proof could there be? Yet skeptics, both then and now, have questioned the authenticity of the account. Could Longinus's blindness and subsequent healing have been exaggerated or even fabricated by early Christians to strengthen their narrative? Or was it a genuine moment of divine intervention? The idea of physical healing as a gateway to spiritual transformation is a recurring theme in Christian theology, but Longinus's story stands out because of its dramatic and immediate impact. One moment of contact with Christ's blood and water was enough to change not just his life, but his entire identity. And yet questions linger. If Longinus was truly healed, why don't we see more concrete evidence of his life outside of these religious texts? Why is there no mention of him in Roman records, despite his supposed rank as a centurion? Could it be that his story was embellished, or even invented, by early Christians looking for a compelling narrative? Or does the absence of historical documentation simply highlight the clandestine nature of faith in the Roman Empire? What makes Longinus's story so compelling is its duality. On one hand, he represents the power of faith to transform even the most unlikely individuals. On the other hand, he raises questions about the intersection of history, legend, and belief. How do we separate fact from fiction in a story that has been retold and reshaped over centuries? And if we can't, does that make his story any less powerful? As we move forward, there's another layer to this tale that demands attention. Longinus's miraculous healing was just the beginning. What happened when this once blind soldier became a voice for a faith that would soon shake the foundations of the Roman Empire? How did the empire react to a man who turned his back on its authority and embraced a belief system it sought to destroy? Could his healing have marked him not just as a believer, but as a target? And how did his journey from soldier to saint lead him to his eventual death? Rome's betrayed hero. When Longinus turned his back on Rome, he was committing a near unforgivable act of defiance against the most powerful empire of the ancient world. Rome thrived on loyalty, discipline, and control. A soldier's allegiance wasn't merely expected, it was demanded. For a centurion like Longinus to abandon his post and adopt a belief system seen as subversive and dangerous wasn't just betrayal, it was treason. But what drove this once loyal enforcer of Roman law to risk it all? Let's unravel the tangled web of his betrayal, faith, and the empire's wrath. After the crucifixion and his miraculous healing, Longinus's transformation wasn't something he could hide. Early accounts suggest he began spreading the message of Christ almost immediately, likely in secret at first. At the time, Christianity was still a fledgling movement, viewed by Rome as a peculiar offshoot of Judaism. But what made it dangerous was its growing appeal, especially among the oppressed and disenfranchised. For someone like Longinus, a Roman soldier tasked with upholding imperial order, to join this movement was a seismic shift. Imagine the whispers in the barracks when word got out. A centurion turned preacher? It was unheard of. To understand why Longinus's actions were so inflammatory, we need to examine the political climate of the time. The Roman Empire was an intricate web of political control that relied heavily on the cooperation of its provinces. The Jewish population in particular was a source of tension. Rebellions and unrest were common, and Rome's response was always swift and brutal. Crucifixion was one of its most potent tools, a public, humiliating death meant to crush dissent and send a clear message. For Longinus to openly challenge this system by preaching the teachings of a man Rome had executed as a criminal was nothing short of revolutionary. Longinus didn't just leave the army quietly. According to tradition, he renounced his Roman ties publicly, shedding his military rank and wealth to embrace a life of faith. He reportedly traveled to Cappadocia in modern-day Turkey, where he began his work as a missionary. Cappadocia was a Roman province with a mix of pagan and Jewish communities. It was a strategic yet risky location for spreading Christianity. The region's rugged terrain and remote villages offered some protection from Roman authorities, but it was also a hotbed of imperial surveillance. The message Longinus carried wasn't just spiritual, it was political dynamite. While we don't have detailed records of Longinus's sermons, apocryphal accounts suggest he spoke passionately about his experiences at Golgotha. Imagine the impact of his testimony. This wasn't just another follower of Christ. This was the man who had stood at the foot of the cross, who had pierced Jesus' side, who had witnessed the sky darken in the earthquake. His words carried the weight of first-hand experience, making him a uniquely powerful figure in the early Christian movement. But with influence came danger. Rome wasn't just wary of Christian preachers, it actively hunted them. The empire viewed Christianity as a threat to its social order, particularly because of its message of equality and its refusal to worship the emperor as a deity. For someone like Longinus, who had once been a symbol of Roman authority, the stakes were even higher. He was a living symbol of the empire's inability to suppress this growing movement. His defection was an embarrassment Rome couldn't afford. According to Christian tradition, Longinus's activities eventually drew the attention of Pontius Pilate, the same governor who had presided over Christ's trial. Pilate had been tasked with maintaining order in Judea, and his handling of the crucifixion had already been a delicate balancing act. Now, years later, hearing that one of the very soldiers involved in that event was preaching the message of Jesus must have been infuriating. Some accounts suggest Pilate issued the order for Longinus's arrest personally, though this remains a point of debate among historians. What happened next is the stuff of legend. Longinus, aware that he was a wanted man, continued his missionary work despite the growing danger. Stories from Eastern Orthodox traditions tell of his travels through Cappadocia, where he performed miracles and converted many to Christianity. One particularly vivid account describes Longinus healing a blind man, echoing his own miraculous recovery at Golgotha. Another story claims he exorcised demons from a possessed woman, further solidifying his reputation as a man touched by divine power. But Rome was relentless. Soldiers were dispatched to Cappadocia to track Longinus down, and their orders were clear: capture him, dead or alive. When the soldiers finally located him, Longinus didn't resist. Instead, he welcomed them with open arms, even offering them food and drink. Imagine the scene: a man who knew his death was imminent, treating his captors not as enemies, but as guests. This act of humility and courage became one of the defining moments of his legacy. Longinus's execution was brutal, as was typical for those accused of treason. Early accounts suggest he was beheaded, and his head was sent back to Pilate as proof of his death. Yet even in death, his story didn't end. The soldiers who executed him were said to be deeply moved by his unwavering faith. Some accounts claim they converted to Christianity themselves, unable to reconcile the peace and conviction they had witnessed in Longinus with the empire's portrayal of Christians as dangerous subversives. But here's where things take an even darker turn. Longinus's defection and execution weren't just a personal loss for Rome, they were a propaganda nightmare. The idea that a Roman centurion had not only abandoned the empire, but had also died for the faith it sought to suppress, was a powerful narrative for early Christians. It showed that the message of Christ could reach even the heart of the empire's military machine. This was a transformation that threatened to undermine the very fabric of Roman authority. The Roman response to Longinus's story was predictably harsh. Christian communities in Cappadocia faced increased persecution, with soldiers raiding villages and arresting suspected believers. Yet the more Rome tried to silence the movement, the more it seemed to grow. Longinus became a martyr, his story spreading far beyond Cappadocia. By the 4th century, his name was being venerated in both Eastern and Western Christian traditions, with churches and relics dedicated to his memory. But was Longinus a hero, a traitor, or something in between? To the Romans, he was undoubtedly a betrayer, a man who had turned his back on his duty and embraced a dangerous ideology. To Christians, he was a hero, a man who had seen the truth and given everything to share it with the world. Yet even within Christian circles, his story raises questions. Did he act out of genuine faith, or was he driven by guilt for his role in the crucifixion? Was his transformation a divine miracle, or was it the result of witnessing an event so profound that it shattered his worldview? And what about Pontius Pilate? Did he see Longinus's defection as a personal failure? Pilate's own legacy is filled with contradictions, an official caught between political expediency and moral doubt. The idea that one of his own soldiers had not only abandoned Rome, but had also become a symbol of the very movement Pilate had tried to suppress must have haunted him. Did Pilate's decision to pursue Longinus stem from a desire to maintain order? Or was it an attempt to erase a reminder of his own role in the crucifixion? Secrets of the Spear That Ruled Kingdoms. The spear that pierced Jesus' side, known as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny, is perhaps one of the most mysterious and controversial relics in history. It's not just a symbol of faith, it's a weapon that, according to legends, has been wielded by emperors, sought by dictators, and whispered about in tales of conquest and power. But what is the truth behind this relic? Could a simple Roman spearhead truly hold such influence? Or has its story been shaped by centuries of myth and ambition? Let's dive into the tangled history of the spear that supposedly started with Saint Longinus and went on to rule kingdoms. The first mention of the Holy Lance as a relic appears centuries after Longinus' time. Early Christian traditions suggest that the lance was preserved as a sacred object, but its exact whereabouts remained a mystery for hundreds of years. By the 4th century, as Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine, relics associated with Christ's passion began to gain immense significance. It was during this time that the story of the spear's miraculous powers began to emerge. Constantine himself was said to have been inspired by a vision of the cross before a critical battle. Though this event didn't involve the spear directly, it set the stage for later rulers to associate victory with relics of Christ. By the time the spear resurfaced in historical records, its reputation as a symbol of divine favor was firmly established. The spear's journey across centuries and continents reads like a mix of religious devotion and political intrigue. By the 11th century, it was reportedly in Antioch, a city central to the Crusades. During the First Crusade, the city was under siege by Muslim forces, and morale among the Crusaders was at an all-time low. Enter Peter Bartholomew, a monk who claimed to have a vision of the Holy Lance buried beneath a local church. After much digging and skepticism, the lance was indeed found. The Crusaders, invigorated by what they saw as a sign from God, rallied and won a decisive battle. But here's the twist. Many doubted the authenticity of the lance, and Peter Bartholomew himself died under mysterious circumstances shortly after. Was the lance truly divine, or was it a convenient prop to manipulate an army in desperate need of hope? Over the centuries, several artifacts have been claimed as the Holy Lance. One of the most famous resides in Vienna, Austria, in the Hofburg Palace's imperial treasury. This lance, said to have passed through the hands of Charlemagne and Otto the Great, became a symbol of imperial authority. Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, allegedly carried the lance into battle, and it was believed to grant victory to its possessor. Otto the Great, too, used the spear as a sign of his divine right to rule, reinforcing its connection to both faith and power. Napoleon Bonaparte was rumored to have sought the lance, though there's little evidence he ever possessed it. What's clear, however, is that the spear has repeatedly been used as a symbol of authority and legitimacy. Whether in the hands of crusaders, emperors, or dictators, its presence was often enough to inspire armies and intimidate opponents. Despite its legendary status, the authenticity of the Holy Lance remains highly debated. Modern scholars and archaeologists have examined the artifact in Vienna, noting that parts of it appear to date back to the 1st century, while others are of later origin. The spearhead itself is said to be missing a small piece, allegedly removed and sent to the Vatican as a separate relic. This raises an intriguing question. Could the lance in Vienna be the real deal? Or is it just one of many forgeries created to satisfy the medieval obsession with relics? What's even more puzzling is the existence of other lances also claimed to be the Holy Lance. One is housed in Armenia's Echmiadzin Cathedral, while another is said to reside in the Vatican. Each has its own backstory, and each has been venerated as the spear that pierced Christ. Could they all be fragments of the original? Or are they entirely separate relics, each given legitimacy by their respective traditions? And if multiple spears exist, what does that say about the reliability of these relics as symbols of faith? The story of the spear also raises questions about the nature of belief itself. How did an object associated with an act of violence, the piercing of Christ's side, become a symbol of divine favor? Some historians argue that the spear's power lies not in its physical properties, but in its symbolism. To hold the spear was to claim a direct connection to Christ's passion and, by extension, divine authority. This made it an irresistible prize for rulers and conquerors seeking to solidify their power. But there's a deeper layer to the spear's legacy, one that ties it back to Longinus. Early Christian texts often emphasize the redemptive power of the objects and people associated with Christ's suffering. Just as Longinus himself was transformed by his role in the crucifixion, so too was the spear. It became not just a weapon, but a relic imbued with spiritual significance. This duality, a tool of death turned into a symbol of life, mirrors the core message of Christianity, that redemption is possible even in the darkest moments. Yet for all its spiritual connotations, the spear's history is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession. Whether it was the Crusaders rallying around a newly discovered relic, Charlemagne wielding it as a symbol of divine right, or Hitler transporting it across Europe in pursuit of power, the spear has been a magnet for those seeking to wield influence. Its story is a reminder of how easily faith can be co-opted for political ends and how objects of devotion can become tools of ambition. Even today, the Holy Lance continues to capture the imagination. It has appeared in books, movies, and conspiracy theories, often portrayed as a mystical artifact with the power to change the course of history. But what if its real power lies not in supernatural forces, but in the stories we tell about it? Could the legend of the spear be more influential than the relic itself? And here's the question that lingers. If the Holy Lance truly exists, where does it belong? Should it remain in the hands of museums and churches? Or does it hold a deeper significance that transcends its physical form? Longinus and the hidden mysteries of power. The story of Longinus doesn't end with the man himself. It's deeply entwined with the power and mystique of the spear he wielded, the weapon that pierced the side of Christ and supposedly altered the destiny of nations. But beyond the physical spear lies something even more intriguing, a network of hidden connections, secret societies, and whispered legends that stretch from ancient Rome to modern conspiracy theories. How did a simple soldier's act become the foundation for a centuries-long obsession with power? And what secrets does his legacy still hold? To understand the hidden mysteries surrounding Longinus and his spear, we must first explore the ancient world's obsession with relics. In the early Christian era, relics were more than sacred objects. They were believed to carry divine power. The idea that a physical item could channel the miraculous wasn't unique to Christianity. Many pagan traditions held similar beliefs. But the spear's association with Christ's crucifixion gave it unparalleled significance. It wasn't just a relic, it was a symbol of divine authority, redemption, and, for some, conquest. This obsession with relics reached fever pitch in the Middle Ages, when rulers began using them as tools to legitimize their reigns. The Holy Roman emperors were especially keen on relics, and the spear associated with Longinus became one of the most coveted. Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman emperor, is said to have carried the spear into battle, believing it granted him victory through divine favor. But here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. Charlemagne's death is said to have occurred on the very day he dropped the spear. Coincidence? Or did the relic's power come with a curse? The notion of a curse tied to the spear persisted through the centuries, adding layers of intrigue to its history. By the time it reached Otto the Great, another Holy Roman emperor, the spear was not just a symbol of divine blessing, but also a talisman of immense, almost supernatural significance. Otto reportedly carried it into the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, where he achieved a decisive victory against the Magyars. From then on, the spear became inseparable from the idea of imperial power, its aura growing with each new tale of triumph and tragedy. But the spear's connection to power wasn't limited to medieval Europe. As Christianity spread, so too did stories of the spear's mystical properties. Some claimed it granted invincibility, others said it revealed hidden truths to its bearer. These tales weren't just spiritual, they had political implications. To possess the spear was to claim a direct link to Christ's passion, effectively positioning the holder as a chosen instrument of divine will. For rulers navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics, this was an invaluable narrative. Yet not everyone who sought the spear was a devout Christian. The Renaissance saw a resurgence of interest in mysticism and alchemy, and the spear became a focal point for secret societies fascinated by its supposed powers. One such group was the Rosicrucians, an esoteric order that emerged in the early 17th century. While much of their history remains shrouded in mystery, the Rosicrucians were known for their obsession with hidden knowledge and relics, and some accounts suggest they believed the spear held the key to unlocking divine secrets. One theory suggests that the spear's allure lies in its duality. On one hand, it's a weapon, a tool of violence used to end lives. On the other, it's a relic, a symbol of redemption and divine grace. This paradox mirrors the story of Longinus himself, a soldier who transformed from executioner to saint. Could it be that the spear's power lies not in its physical properties, but in what it represents? A weapon that became a vessel for salvation, a relic that bridges the mortal and the divine. But there's another layer to the mystery of Longinus and the spear, the role of secrecy in preserving their legacy. Throughout history, the spear has been guarded by kings, popes, and secret societies, each adding to its mystique. In some cases, this secrecy may have been a deliberate strategy. By shrouding the spear in mystery, its guardians could enhance its perceived value and control its narrative. But secrecy also breeds speculation, and over time, the line between fact and fiction has become increasingly blurred. This brings us to the present day, where the spear's legacy continues to evolve. Modern scientific analyses of the Vienna lance have raised more questions than answers. While parts of the spear date back to the 1st century, other components are clearly later additions. This has led some to speculate that the spear may have been modified or even forged to fit the expectations of its time. The enduring fascination with Longinus and the spear also speaks to a deeper human desire, the quest for meaning. In a world often dominated by chaos and uncertainty, symbols like the spear offer a sense of connection to something greater. Whether seen as a relic of divine power, a talisman of conquest, or a metaphor for redemption, the spear continues to resonate because it taps into universal themes of transformation and the search for truth. And yet questions remain. How much of the spear's story is grounded in historical fact, and how much has been shaped by centuries of myth-making? What would Longinus himself think if he knew the spear that changed his life would go on to shape the destiny of nations? And is it possible that its true power lies not in its history, but in the stories we continue to tell about it? The saint worshipped in the East and forgotten in the West. The legacy of Saint Longinus may be universal in its theological significance, but how he is remembered or forgotten varies dramatically depending on where you look. In Eastern Orthodox traditions, Longinus is celebrated with reverence, his story immortalized through hymns, iconography, and feast days. In the West, however, his name is often relegated to the margins of Christian lore, overshadowed by other saints and relics. This stark contrast raises compelling questions. Why has Longinus's legacy endured in the East while fading in the West? And what does this divide reveal about the broader dynamics of Christianity's development? The Eastern Orthodox Church venerates Saint Longinus as a central figure in the Passion narrative. Known simply as Saint Longinus in these traditions, his feast day is celebrated on October 16, with elaborate rituals that emphasize his role as both a witness to Christ's crucifixion and a martyr for the faith. In Orthodox iconography, Longinus is often depicted in the act of piercing Christ's side. But there's more to his portrayal than just this moment of transformation. Many icons show him with radiant, almost serene expressions, reflecting his spiritual awakening and his later martyrdom. These images emphasize not his role as a soldier, but his journey from doubt to devotion. The Orthodox tradition also includes vivid accounts of Longinus's missionary work in Cappadocia. These narratives go far beyond the sparse details found in Western sources, painting him as a tireless preacher who converted many to Christianity despite constant threats from Roman authorities. One popular story tells of how Longinus defied an order from Pontius Pilate to return to Judea for questioning. Instead of fleeing, he is said to have stood his ground, openly declaring his faith and denouncing the empire's persecution of Christians. This act of defiance made him a symbol of unwavering courage, and it is this image of Longinus that continues to inspire Orthodox believers. In contrast, Western Christianity has largely overlooked Longinus. While his name appears in certain medieval texts and his relics are venerated in some Catholic churches, he has never achieved the same level of recognition as other saints associated with Christ's Passion, such as Veronica or Joseph of Arimathea. Part of this may stem from the fact that the Western Church focused more on relics like the Holy Lance than on the man who wielded it. Over time, Longinus became a peripheral figure, his story overshadowed by more prominent narratives. This divide between East and West is not just about Longinus. It reflects broader differences in how the two branches of Christianity have approached their saints and their histories. In the East, the emphasis has always been on the spiritual and mystical aspects of sainthood. Saints like Longinus are celebrated not just for their deeds, but for their inner transformation and their role in revealing divine truths. The West, on the other hand, has often prioritized saints who were institutionally significant, popes, bishops, or founders of religious orders. In this context, Longinus, a humble soldier with no ties to the hierarchy of the church, may have seemed less relevant. But the story gets even more complex when we consider the role of relics in shaping Longinus's legacy. In the Eastern tradition, the focus is on his martyrdom and his spiritual journey, with less emphasis on physical artifacts. In the West, however, relics like the Holy Lance have often overshadowed the individuals associated with them. The spear believed to be tied to Longinus became a symbol of imperial power, but it rarely brought attention back to the man himself. Instead, it became part of a broader narrative about the authority of the church and the divine right of kings. Despite his relative obscurity in the West, there are pockets where Longinus's story has been preserved. The Church of St. Peter in Rome claims to house Longinus's skull, displayed in a gilded reliquary. This relic has attracted pilgrims for centuries, though its authenticity remains a matter of debate. Another notable site is the Basilica of Saint Longinus in Mantua, Italy, which holds what is said to be part of the Holy Lance. These locations keep his memory alive, but they are exceptions rather than the rule. One of the most fascinating aspects of Longinus's veneration in the East is how it has been integrated into the daily lives of believers. In Orthodox Christianity, saints are not distant figures. They are seen as intercessors and role models. Longinus, with his dramatic conversion and unwavering faith, embodies the idea that no one is beyond redemption. This message resonates deeply in a tradition that places great emphasis on repentance and the transformative power of faith. The hymns dedicated to Longinus are particularly striking. One hymn, sung on his feast day, praises him as the soldier of the King of Heaven, a reference to his transition from serving the Roman Empire to serving Christ. Another hymn describes his eyes being opened not just physically but spiritually, capturing the essence of his story in a single line. These hymns are not just expressions of devotion, they are acts of storytelling, ensuring that Longinus's legacy is passed down through generations. In modern times, Longinus has become a symbol of unity for Orthodox Christians, especially in regions where the church faces persecution. His story of standing up to imperial power and enduring martyrdom has been invoked in sermons and writings as a source of strength for believers navigating their own struggles. This connection to contemporary issues keeps Longinus's legacy relevant, even as the details of his life remain shrouded in mystery. But why has the West failed to embrace Longinus with the same passion? Some scholars argue that his story lacks the kind of institutional backing that other saints have received. Unlike figures like St. Peter or St. Paul, Longinus was not a central figure in the early church, nor was he associated with any major theological debates. His story is compelling but peripheral, making it easier for it to fade into the background as Western Christianity evolved. There's also the question of cultural differences. The Eastern Orthodox Church has a long tradition of celebrating saints who come from humble backgrounds, emphasizing their humanity and their connection to everyday believers. The West, influenced by centuries of papal authority and hierarchical structures, has often focused on saints who reinforce the power and prestige of the church. In this context, Longinus's story, powerful as it is, may have seemed less significant. And yet there's something universal about Longinus's journey that transcends these cultural divides. His story is one of transformation, courage, and redemption, qualities that resonate with believers, regardless of their tradition. Perhaps this is why his legacy has endured in the East and why it still holds the potential to inspire in the West. So what can his story teach us about the ways faith is shaped by culture and tradition? And how might rediscovering his legacy bridge the gap between East and West, reminding us of the shared roots of Christianity? Could it be that Longinus, the man who stood between two worlds, Rome and Christianity, still has something to offer in our divided world today? The bloody end that sealed his legacy. Longinus's journey from Roman centurion to Christian martyr culminates in a story as gripping as it is tragic. His final chapter, marked by defiance, faith, and bloodshed, solidified his place as a symbol of unwavering devotion. While much of his early life remains cloaked in mystery, the accounts of his martyrdom provide a stark, vivid window into the life of a man who dared to stand against the might of Rome. How does a soldier who once wielded a spear in service to the empire end up becoming one of its most defiant adversaries? The answer lies in his remarkable transformation and the brutal retribution it invited. One of the earliest accounts of Longinus's martyrdom comes from Eastern Christian traditions, which describe him as a fearless advocate for the Christian faith. He is said to have converted countless individuals, including several high-ranking Roman officials, much to the ire of local governors. As mentioned before, Longinus's defiance reached a critical point when news of his activities reached Pontius Pilate. Though Pilate's direct involvement remains debated, some traditions hold that he issued the order for Longinus's arrest, seeking to eliminate a figure whose very existence symbolized the empire's inability to suppress the Christian faith. Whether or not Pilate himself played a role, it is clear that Rome viewed Longinus as a threat. For a former centurion to not only abandon his post, but also openly preach a faith that Rome deemed subversive was an act of treason. The capture of Longinus was no ordinary arrest. Roman soldiers were dispatched to Cappadocia with orders to bring him back alive or dead. According to tradition, Longinus, aware of their arrival, made no attempt to flee. Instead, he welcomed the soldiers into his home, offering them food and drink. Imagine the scene: a man fully aware that his death is imminent, treating his captors not as enemies, but as guests. This act of humility and hospitality was a testament to Longinus's faith and courage, setting the tone for the dramatic events that would follow. When the soldiers revealed their mission, Longinus reportedly responded with calm acceptance. He refused to deny his faith or renounce his beliefs, even when faced with the threat of execution. His unwavering resolve left an impression on his captors, some of whom are said to have converted to Christianity after witnessing his testimony. But Longinus's fate was sealed. He was taken into custody and subjected to a brutal interrogation, during which he continued to proclaim his faith. Yet this act of suppression had the opposite effect. Longinus's martyrdom only amplified his legacy, inspiring countless others to embrace Christianity even in the face of persecution. Stories of his courage and miracles spread rapidly, particularly in the eastern provinces, where he became a symbol of resistance against imperial oppression. His death, far from silencing his message, turned him into a beacon of hope for early Christians navigating the dangerous waters of Roman rule. One of the most enduring aspects of Longinus's martyrdom is the role of miracles in his story. Eastern Christian traditions are rich with accounts of supernatural events surrounding his death. Some say that his blood, spilled during his execution, brought healing to those who witnessed it. Others describe how his remains became a source of divine power, leading to the conversion of entire communities. These tales, while impossible to verify, underscore the profound impact Longinus had on the early Christian imagination. In the centuries following his death, Longinus's story continued to evolve, shaped by the needs and beliefs of the communities that venerated him. By the 4th century, when Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, Longinus was firmly established as a saint. Churches and monasteries were dedicated to his memory, particularly in Cappadocia, where his missionary work and martyrdom took place. His relics, including his head and parts of the Holy Lance, became objects of pilgrimage, drawing believers from across the empire. But Longinus's legacy is not without its controversies. Some scholars argue that the details of his martyrdom were embellished over time, shaped by the early church's desire to create compelling narratives of faith and resistance. Others question the historical accuracy of the accounts altogether, suggesting that Longinus may be more of a symbolic figure than a historical one. Yet even if his story has been mythologized, its impact remains undeniable. Longinus represents the transformative power of faith and the courage to stand against oppression, qualities that resonate across centuries and cultures. As we reflect on the bloody end that sealed Longinus's legacy, there's a shocking historical figure who was involved with this legendary soldier: Hitler's hunt for the spear of Longinus. Adolf Hitler's obsession with the occult is well documented, but among the relics and artifacts he sought, none has captured the public imagination quite like the spear of Longinus. Known as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny, This relic was believed to be the very spear used by Longinus to pierce the side of Jesus Christ. According to legend, whoever possessed the spear would wield untold power, capable of shaping the destiny of nations. For Hitler, the allure of the spear was not just its mystical reputation, but its symbolism as a tool of absolute control. The story of how the spear became entwined with Hitler's regime is a chilling proof of how faith and legend can be exploited for darker purposes. The origins of Hitler's fascination with the spear of Longinus can be traced back to his early years in Vienna. As a struggling artist in the early 20th century, Hitler would often visit the Hofburg Palace, where the spear was displayed in the imperial treasury. At the time, the artifact was already shrouded in legend, with centuries of history tying it to figures like Charlemagne and Otto the Great. The spear was said to have been carried into countless battles, granting victory to its bearer. For a young, disillusioned Hitler, the spear likely represented not just a piece of history, but a symbol of power and destiny. Hitler's exposure to the spear coincided with his growing interest in Germanic mysticism and the occult. He became deeply influenced by the ideas of Ariosophy, a pseudo-scientific belief system that blended racial theory with occult practices. Ariosophists saw artifacts like the Spear of Longinus as keys to unlocking ancient mystical powers. It's said that Hitler became convinced that the spear held the potential to fulfill his own ambitions, not just as a leader, but as a figure of almost messianic importance. When Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, the spear's legend followed him. As he consolidated control over Germany, his regime began to appropriate historical and religious symbols to reinforce its ideology. The Nazis were masters of propaganda, and artifacts like the Spear of Longinus played perfectly into their narrative of divine destiny. Under the direction of Heinrich Himmler, the SS undertook an extensive campaign to locate and acquire relics with supposed mystical significance. This initiative, known as the Ahnenerbe, sought to connect the Nazi regime to ancient traditions and symbols of power. By 1938, the Spear of Longinus was already in Hitler's possession, or so he believed. Following the annexation of Austria, the Nazis seized the treasures of the Hofburg Palace, including the spear. Hitler reportedly ordered it to be transported to Nuremberg, a city he considered the spiritual heart of the Third Reich. Nuremberg was home to some of the regime's grandest rallies and propaganda spectacles, and placing the spear there was meant to symbolize its central role in Nazi ideology. But what was it about the spear that so captivated Hitler and his inner circle? According to legend, the Spear of Longinus was not just a relic, but a weapon imbued with supernatural power. Stories claim that its bearer would be invincible, so long as they held onto the spear. But the legend came with a dark twist. If the spear were lost or taken, the bearer's downfall would be swift and catastrophic. For Hitler, who saw himself as the destined leader of a new world order, the spear likely represented both an opportunity and a warning. The Nazis didn't just use the spear as a symbol, they actively incorporated its legend into their propaganda. The spear was displayed in Nuremberg, where it became a centerpiece of Nazi myth-making. Speeches and ceremonies often referenced its alleged power, tying the regime's ambitions to a narrative of divine right and historical inevitability. For the German people, already reeling from economic hardship and the humiliation of World War I, the spear offered a sense of hope, albeit one built on dangerous lies. But as the war turned against the Nazis, the spear's legend took on a darker tone. By the early 1940s, Allied forces were making significant gains, and the aura of invincibility surrounding Hitler and his regime began to crumble. In 1945, as American troops closed in on Nuremberg, the spear's fate became a matter of urgency. According to some accounts, Hitler ordered the spear to be moved to a secure location, fearing it would fall into enemy hands. But his plans were disrupted when Allied bombers destroyed much of Nuremberg, including the building where the spear was kept. The spear was eventually recovered by American forces, who returned it to Vienna after the war. But by then its legend had already been tainted by its association with Hitler and the Nazis. For many, the spear became a symbol not of divine power, but of the dangers of obsession and the manipulation of faith. The idea that an artifact tied to one of Christianity's most sacred events could be used to justify atrocities and conquest was a stark reminder of how symbols can be twisted to serve human ambition. Hitler's obsession with the spear has also fueled countless conspiracy theories, particularly in the realm of pop culture. Books and films have portrayed the spear as a mystical weapon capable of altering the course of history. In some stories, it's the ultimate prize for secret societies, while in others, it's a tool of unimaginable destruction. These portrayals often draw on the real-life events of World War II, blending historical fact with fiction to create compelling narratives. But beyond the myths and conspiracies lies a deeper question. What does the story of Hitler and the spear reveal about the nature of power and belief? For Hitler, the spear was more than a relic. It was a symbol of his destiny, a physical manifestation of his ambition to rule the world. Yet in the end, the spear did not save him. His empire collapsed, his vision of a 1,000-year Reich reduced to ruins. If anything, the spear's legend served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the consequences of placing faith in objects rather than principles. And what of the spear's future? Today it remains locked away in the Hofburg Palace, a relic of both history and legend. But its story continues to evolve, shaped by new discoveries, debates, and interpretations. Whether viewed as a sacred artifact, a symbol of power, or a cautionary tale, the Spear of Longinus remains one of history's most enigmatic objects. Could it be that the spear's true power lies not in its physical form, but in the stories we tell about it? And what might these stories teach us about the interplay between faith, power, and the human desire for meaning? Saint or legend, separating historical truth from church-built myth. The story of Longinus is a fascinating intersection of history, faith, and myth, a tale that begins in the dusty streets of first-century Judea and weaves through centuries of Christian tradition. But how much of his story is grounded in historical fact, and how much is the product of theological embellishment? The challenge of separating the man from the myth is not just about uncovering the truth of Longinus's life, but also about understanding how stories evolve to meet the needs of the communities that tell them. Let's dive into the murky waters of historical evidence, apocryphal texts, and the motivations behind shaping Longinus into a saint. The first major hurdle in determining the historical accuracy of Longinus's story is the glaring lack of contemporary records. The Gospels, the primary sources for the events of Christ's crucifixion, do not name the centurion who pierced his side. The Gospel of John mentions only that a Roman soldier performed the act, ensuring that Jesus was dead before being taken down from the cross. This omission leaves a void that later traditions eagerly filled. The earliest references to Longinus by name appear in apocryphal texts such as the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Acts of Pilate. Written several centuries after the crucifixion, these texts introduce Longinus as the soldier who carried out the act, setting the stage for his transformation into a saint. The name Longinus itself is a clue to the story's evolution. Derived from the Greek word longe, meaning spear or lance, the name appears to have been assigned to the centurion retroactively, likely as a symbolic reference to his defining act. This raises an important question. Was Longinus a real person, or was he a fictional figure created to personify the role of the centurion in the Passion narrative? Some historians suggest that the name and story of Longinus were crafted to give a human face to the events surrounding Christ's crucifixion, making them more relatable and compelling for early Christian audiences. Adding to the complexity is the fact that early Christian communities often adapted and expanded biblical narratives to reflect their theological and cultural contexts. In the case of Longinus, his story likely evolved as a way to emphasize key Christian themes, such as redemption and transformation. The idea that a Roman soldier, a symbol of imperial power and oppression, could be redeemed and become a follower of Christ resonated deeply with early Christians, many of whom faced persecution under Roman rule. Longinus's journey from executioner to saint became a powerful symbol of the transformative power of faith, a narrative that would have been particularly meaningful in the context of a growing but vulnerable religious movement. One of the most striking elements of Longinus's story is the claim that he was healed of blindness or poor eyesight when blood and water from Christ's wound touched his face. This miraculous healing is not mentioned in the Gospels, but appears in later apocryphal and hagiographic accounts. The symbolism here is rich. Just as Christ's blood was believed to cleanse sin and offer salvation, it also physically restored Longinus's sight, making him the first recipient of the redemption offered through Christ's sacrifice. But was this miracle a historical event, or was it a theological construct designed to illustrate the power of Christ's blood? The lack of corroborating evidence makes it impossible to say for certain, but the story's enduring appeal speaks to its spiritual significance. Another key element of Longinus's narrative is his role as a martyr. According to tradition, after his conversion, Longinus left the Roman army and began preaching the gospel, eventually traveling to Cappadocia. His defiance of Roman authority and refusal to renounce his faith reportedly led to his arrest and execution. However, historical records from the time are silent on the subject of Longinus's martyrdom. This absence of evidence raises the possibility that his death, like other aspects of his story, was embellished or even fabricated by later writers, seeking to strengthen his status as a saint. The development of Longinus's story must also be viewed in the context of the early church's efforts to establish its authority and legitimacy. By the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine, the church had begun to compile and codify the stories of saints and martyrs. These narratives served not only as sources of inspiration for believers, but also as tools for consolidating the church's influence. In this environment, figures like Longinus took on heightened significance. His story, with its themes of conversion, miracles, and martyrdom, fit neatly into the framework of Christian sainthood, making him an ideal candidate for veneration. The veneration of Longinus was further amplified by the proliferation of relics associated with him. The spear that pierced Christ's side, known as the Holy Lance, became one of the most famous relics in Christendom, with multiple churches claiming to possess it. Longinus's relics, including his head and other bodily remains, were similarly dispersed and venerated. The practice of venerating relics was deeply tied to the church's efforts to connect believers to the physical reality of Christ's passion and the lives of the saints. However, the authenticity of these relics has been a subject of debate for centuries. Were they truly connected to Longinus, or were they later creations intended to attract pilgrims and reinforce the saint's legend? Modern scholarship has sought to separate the historical Longinus, if he existed, from the layers of myth and symbolism that have accrued around his name. Some historians argue that the story of Longinus should be understood as a blend of historical events and theological imagination. The act of piercing Christ's side was undoubtedly carried out by a Roman soldier, but the identity of that soldier may never be known. The assignment of a name, a backstory, and a post-crucifixion journey can be seen as a way of giving narrative depth to an otherwise anonymous figure. The cultural and geographical variations in Longinus's story also shed light on how his legend was shaped over time. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Longinus is celebrated as a central figure in the Passion narrative, with his feast day observed on October 16. Orthodox accounts emphasize his role as a missionary and martyr, highlighting his transformation and his defiance of Roman authority. In the Western tradition, however, Longinus has been somewhat overshadowed by other saints and relics associated with the Passion. This divergence reflects broader differences in how Eastern and Western Christianity approach the stories of saints and their significance. Despite the uncertainty surrounding his story, Longinus remains a compelling figure in Christian tradition. His transformation from a Roman soldier to a saint embodies the idea that no one is beyond redemption, a message that continues to resonate with believers today. At the same time, his story serves as a reminder of how history and faith intersect, often blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Whether Longinus was a historical figure, a symbolic construct, or a combination of both, his legacy points to the power of storytelling in shaping our understanding of the past. As we sift through the layers of legend and theology surrounding Longinus, one question remains: does it matter whether he was a real person? For believers, the truth of Longinus's story lies not in its historical accuracy, but in its spiritual message. His journey from doubt to faith, from blindness to sight, and from soldier to saint offers a model of transformation and hope. But for historians and skeptics, the story of Longinus is also a case study in how myths are created and sustained, revealing the complex interplay between faith, culture, and power. From sacred relic to Hollywood obsession, Saint Longinus and the Spear of Destiny have transcended their historical and theological origins to become fixtures of popular culture. From blockbuster films to conspiracy theories, their stories have been adapted, reimagined, and mythologized, reflecting society's enduring fascination with power, mystery, and redemption. But how did a Roman centurion and a spear tied to one of Christianity's most sacred events evolve into icons of Hollywood thrillers and speculative fiction? The journey from sacred relic to cultural obsession reveals as much about us as it does about the myths themselves. The modern fascination with the spear of destiny arguably began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Western audiences were captivated by mysticism and the occult. Books such as The Holy Grail, its legends and symbolism introduced a new generation to relics of the Passion, weaving them into narratives of hidden knowledge and secret power. The Spear of Longinus, with its dramatic history and alleged supernatural properties, quickly became a central figure in these tales. But it wasn't until the 20th century that the spear, and by extension, Longinus, became enmeshed in the broader realm of popular entertainment. One of the earliest and most influential depictions of the spear in modern culture came from Trevor Ravenscroft's The Spear of Destiny, published in 1972. The book claimed that Adolf Hitler's rise to power was connected to his possession of the spear, blending historical facts with speculative fiction. While widely criticized for its lack of scholarly rigor, the book was a sensation, inspiring countless conspiracy theories and drawing attention to the relic's storied past. Ravenscroft's work cemented the spear as a symbol of both divine and malevolent power, a narrative that has since been echoed in numerous films, novels, and television shows. Hollywood, always eager for a compelling story, seized on the dramatic potential of the spear. In the 1981 classic Raiders of the Lost Ark, the film's protagonist, Indiana Jones, battles Nazis in pursuit of another biblical relic, the Ark of the Covenant. While the spear isn't explicitly mentioned, the movie set the stage for later films to explore similar themes of religious artifacts as sources of ultimate power. This concept came full circle in Constantine, 2005, where the Spear of Destiny plays a central role. In this supernatural thriller, the spear is portrayed as a weapon capable of unleashing apocalyptic forces, reinforcing its status as a relic of immense and dangerous power. But Hollywood isn't the only place where Longinus and the spear have left their mark. The relic has also appeared in video games, comic books, and even anime. In Neon Genesis Evangelion, a cult favorite anime series, the Spear of Longinus is a key plot device used to pierce godlike entities known as angels. This version of the spear, while far removed from its biblical origins, reflects the enduring allure of the object as a symbol of divine intervention and cosmic power. Similarly, in the world of gaming, the spear has been featured in franchises like Assassin's Creed, where it is tied to secret societies and hidden truths, further embedding it in narratives of mystery and intrigue. The appeal of Longinus and the spear in modern storytelling lies in their duality. On one hand, they are steeped in religious significance, tied to the crucifixion of Christ and the themes of sacrifice, redemption, and salvation. On the other hand, they embody a sense of danger and unpredictability, representing power that can corrupt as easily as it can save. This dual nature makes them versatile symbols, capable of fitting into stories that range from theological meditations to action-packed thrillers. The cultural obsession with Longinus and the spear is also deeply tied to our collective fascination with the unknown. In a world increasingly dominated by science and rationality, artifacts like the spear offer a connection to the mystical and the miraculous. They serve as reminders of a time when faith and legend were intertwined, when objects were believed to hold not just symbolic but tangible power. This longing for mystery is evident in the way the spear is often portrayed as both a relic of the past and a key to the future, a bridge between what we know and what we yearn to understand. And such stories are especially interesting to creative people because it allows them to explore the idea of theology and mythology and lets them reach the peak of their imagination. And of course, being able to present it to the common man in the form of movies, shows, games, and books is the best way to keep a story alive, no matter how many centuries have passed since it actually happened. Yet this modern mythologizing of Longinus and the spear is not without its controversies. Critics argue that popular depictions often distort their historical and theological significance, reducing them to mere plot devices or sensationalized symbols. For example, the portrayal of the spear as a tool of apocalyptic destruction in Constantine may thrill audiences, but it bears little resemblance to its role in Christian tradition. Similarly, conspiracy theories linking the spear to Hitler, secret societies, and hidden prophecies often overshadow the more profound spiritual messages tied to the relic. At the same time, these modern adaptations also serve a valuable purpose. They keep the story of Longinus alive. In a world where fewer people are familiar with biblical narratives, films, books, and games, introduce new audiences to the centurion and his spear, even if the details are embellished or fictionalized. For many, these depictions spark curiosity, prompting them to explore the historical and theological roots of the legend. In this way, the cultural obsession with Longinus and the spear becomes a form of storytelling, preserving their legacy in new and unexpected ways. Beyond entertainment, the spear has also found a place in contemporary spirituality and esotericism. Some modern mystics view the spear as a symbol of personal transformation, drawing parallels between Longinus's act of piercing Christ's side and the human journey of seeking truth and redemption. Workshops, books, and lectures on the spear often emphasize its metaphorical significance, exploring how it can inspire inner change and spiritual growth. While these interpretations are far removed from the relic's historical and biblical context, they highlight its continued relevance as a source of meaning and inspiration. Interestingly, the figure of Longinus himself has seen less cultural adaptation than the spear. While the relic has been reimagined countless times, Longinus remains a relatively understated presence in modern storytelling. This may be due to the ambiguity surrounding his character. Was he a historical figure, a literary creation, or a theological construct? Whatever the reason, his story continues to captivate those who delve into it, offering a glimpse into the transformative power of faith and the complexities of human redemption. As we consider the journey of Longinus and the spear from sacred relics to Hollywood icons, one question looms large. What does their enduring appeal say about us? Why do we continue to be drawn to these stories even as their details fade into myth and speculation? Perhaps the answer lies in the themes they embody, themes of faith, power, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. In Longinus's transformation from a Roman centurion to a Christian saint, we see the possibility of change and redemption, a message that resonates across cultures and eras. And in the Spear of Destiny, we confront the allure and danger of power, a reminder that the choices we make define the legacies we leave behind. What do you think? Was Longinus a real historical figure? Or is he just a powerful legend shaped by faith? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed diving into this incredible story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating mysteries. Who knows what we'll uncover next? Stick around, you won't want to miss it.